Copper. With global production at 19.5 million tonnes per year, this is a very important commodity and we see it used extensively in copper wiring for telephones. Hi, in today's episode of Commodity Brief we're going to be looking at copper. Now, copper is one of those metals which is mined in rather large quantities and then is refined and traded around the world. So it is, first of all, it is traded in its ore form and then it is also traded in its finished refined form. So what we're talking about is very large mines where we're mining very large quantities, often open cast mines, and it's one of those commodities where basically bigger is better. The bigger you can get, the better it is. And so we have the extraction, we have the actual ore is collected and then it's transformed into smaller pieces and transported around the world. In terms of the copper production, we're talking about 19.5 million tonnes of copper produced every year. As you can see, the large majority of that is in Chile. In fact, over 55% of the world's copper production comes from Chile, then followed by China, Peru and the United States, which are all quite close together in terms of quantities. In terms of the production of copper, essentially you have these companies here make up the biggest 5 producers, more or less. And so first of all, some of them are well-known household names and some of them are much less well-known. Obviously Glencore we know because their merger with Xstrata. Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton are very big into many different types of metals, and then you have some which are a little bit more specific. Otherwise, in terms of reserves, again, Chile has some of the largest reserves around the world, and total world reserves, we're looking around 700 million tonnes in terms of reserves. Otherwise, the companies that are trading copper, these are some of the companies that you see on a regular basis. The companies that are very present in metal trading. So first of all, Glencore, obviously. Louis Dreyfus Company, which do a tremendous number of different commodities, but they're very big into copper as well. And Trafigura, which are very strong in their metal trading, in both raw metal when it comes out in the ore form, and also refined metal and the processing in the middle. Now, in terms of the use, why do we actually use copper? And so as you can see, there are a number of different uses that we have around the world. First of all, building construction. Building construction is one of the largest, making up almost a third of the use of copper. We also have electrical and electronic products. So first of all, copper wiring. We think about that an awful lot, and in fact, we see copper wiring being used for telephone wires very commonly. Otherwise, we have transportation equipment, consumer goods and products more and more. A lot of electronic goods, they require small quantities of copper for their production. And also we have industrial machinery using up about 10%. So actually quite a wide use. We do have these 2 areas dominating the use of copper, but otherwise there are quite a few other uses we might not normally have focused on. And so in terms of copper itself, the transportation can be quite tricky. And so copper is essentially transported in a number of different forms. First of all, it can be transported as lumps as it comes out of the ground. And so this is literally just lumps of rock with a high copper percentage. Then it's also transported in a fine powder, basically copper fines. And this is something that we see a number of issues with this because it can result in what we call liquefaction. Liquefaction, we've looked at it before when we looked at iron ore. Essentially, liquefaction is the fact that a commodity like this, with a certain percentage of moisture content, can, in some circumstances, take on the characteristics of a liquid. And so what that means is, if it's loaded into the vessel like this, as the vessel's sailing across the ocean, and there are rhythmic vibration of the waves, then the cargo, as the vessel is sailing from side to side, then the cargo can actually liquefy at one point. It can then end up going flat in the vessel when the vessel is on its side, and then it can solidify again. And so what that means is that then the center of balance, center of gravity of the vessel is completely thrown off. And if this happens a number of times, the vessel can end up capsizing and sinking. And this is a huge problem that we have, and we have to be incredibly careful with the cargoes that we're loading at the loading port to make sure that the limit of moisture that they're allowed to be transported with is well known and is documented, and the actual moisture content itself is well known as well, keeping in mind that most of these goods tend to be stored outside in countries where you might have large quantities of rain. So that essentially brings us towards the end of looking at copper. This is obviously a vessel which is undergoing liquefaction, and as you can see, the problem is the vessel just goes more and more of an angle, and the only solution really is to find a sandbank and run your vessel aground. And otherwise, in terms of copper itself, it is quite a large market. There is a large futures market, a derivatives market, and so you have to be very, very careful when you are trading it. It is important to be very, very knowledgeable about the commodity itself. And as we've already seen, it is dominated by some of the very, very, very large trading companies. It's quite unusual to have small copper traders. So that brings us to the end of looking at copper, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Commodity Brief. Please click back soon for more episodes looking at different commodities. Thank you.